All right, can everybody hear me? Oh, yeah, that's good. All right, good afternoon. I'm the last one between you and lunch. So I'm going to try to keep this lively and short and to the point. As you've already heard, I'm a trade lawyer. I'm one of those guys who represents you all when you have problems in the United States. Hopefully you don't have them too often. It's lovely being here, though, in Budapest. Normally I get to go to places like Detroit, Chicago. Las Vegas is okay. Whenever I tell my wife I'm going to those places, she doesn't want to come with me, but I told her I was coming here, and her next breath was, when are we leaving? So we had a great time yesterday, except we had a little incident out of St. Stephen's Cathedral. We were totally engrossed in this beautiful cathedral, looking at the architecture, lovely. Gentleman comes up to me, says, can I take your picture? And he's wearing these big sunglasses. I'm like, this is kind of strange, right? This doesn't happen very often. So he takes the picture and he says, take another one. At this point, my wife is kind of catching on. He's got a wine glass in this hat, right? And he's kind of laughing at us and stuff. And then he takes his sunglasses off. It's one of my friends from Turkey. So, Karan, where are you? I'm going to get you back. He punked me yesterday. So anyway, we're here today to talk about rebar. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to talk about the current status of the rebar cases, what's been going on, and then I was also asked to talk for a few minutes about what's going on more generally in the United States, because we're all looking at the tea leaves trying to figure out what the Trump administration is going to do. And I'm going to give you my current prognostications on where we are and where we may be headed. So, I always like to start out these talks because I represent the Turkish producers. I've represented Turkish producers for years. I represent the Turkish Steel Exporters Association. And obviously, Turkey has been very active in the markets. A couple of fun factoids for you. Turkey is the 9th largest steel exporter in the world. Also the 8th largest producer and the 6th largest importer, which you don't think would be the case, except they import a lot of what we like to call scrap and billets. And so they are a big consumer, a big producer, and a big exporter of steel, and have become a much bigger player on the world stage over the last 10 years in particular, which is why I have been very busy representing them, because when you become big in the US market, you become a target for trade cases in the US market. And so we've had several of those going back over 10 years now. Here's some quick stats on the current production or exports or imports of into the US of steel from Turkey. I point you to what started in 2012. Look at the long products, jumped significantly. If you see imports double like that in a period of a few years, you might as well put a big target on your back to US producers like Nucor and say, please shoot at us with a trade case, because that's what's going to happen to you when your imports or exports to the US increase that much. And sure to form, that's what we've had going on now for the last several years, starting in about 2013 and continuing to today, lots of trade activity involving Turkey. And in past cases, the different countries have been involved. In the last round, Mexico was involved. In the current round, Japan and Taiwan are both involved in the cases involving rebar. Some more specifics. Who can you tell me of those top 5 in red have not had a dumping case filed against them? Canada. Can you guess why Canada is the only country that hasn't been filed against? Because US and Canada have joint ownership of mills. And that points to a basic fact of life in the dumping world. People bring these cases strategically. When I first started in this business, it was us versus them. There were US producers and there were foreign producers. The equation has gotten a lot more complicated than that in the last 10, 15 years because US producers have bought foreign producers. US Steel operates all over the world. Nucor operates all over the world. Steel Dynamic has operations outside the United States. It's not so simple anymore in bringing these cases, so people bring them in a very strategic fashion. And I dare say it's not because you want to remedy unfair trade so much as you want to boost the price in the markets to some extent. There is still some unfair trading going on, but for the most part, people are trying to change the market dynamic, and that's what I see a lot of. Current rebar under order. At the current time, we just heard China is under order. There's not a lot of rebar coming in from China anymore. Turkey is under a preliminary order for AD and CVD now. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Mexico got caught in the last case with some significant margins, and they are still active, but I think they got hit with 25% margins, so they're struggling a bit to try to stay in the market. Other countries are smaller producers, and they've just gotten hit by being in the wrong place at the wrong time with one of the larger producers. So that trend is sort of continuing as we go along. Here's a quick history of the cases. The first dumping cases were brought against Turkish rebar in 1997. Those resulted in orders which lasted for almost 10 years. I started picking up Turkish trade cases from producers in about 2003, 2004. We quickly got the Turkish producers on track to get zero dumping rates consistently, review after review after review. And in the old days, if you got 3 years of zeros, you could apply to be removed from an order. And so we got several Turkish producers removed from dumping orders during that period of time, culminating in what we call a sunset review in 2008 and 2009, where I went in front of the International Trade Commission and basically said, why are we having an order anymore? 80% of Turkish production is now not under a dumping order. You should remove this order completely, and that's what happened. That then brought us some peace for 4 years, 3 or 4 years, pretty much. And then in 2013, 2014, Nucor, Gerdau, CMC, buyers, and the other producers in the what we call RTAC, or the Rebar Trade Action Coalition, decided they were going to come back and bring a new case. So they brought a rebar case against Mexico, only dumping, and then Turkey, which is dumping and countervailing duty. In that case, in 2014, there was no dumping found against Turkey. We went through a very rigorous investigation process. We proved to the authorities without a shadow of a doubt that there was absolutely no dumping of product going on from the Turkish producers. So no order was put in place. We did, however, get stuck with a 1.25% subsidies margin for one of the producers, Ishtash, which was based on a rather outrageous claim by the government of the United States that Turkey was receiving a benefit in the form of underpriced coal used in its power plants, which are used to feed the rebar mills. They were saying that Turkey was buying coal from the state enterprise in Turkey at an unfairly low rate, and they judged the actual rate of coal prices at that point in time to be over $280 a ton. Now, anybody who imports coal knows that steam coal runs at between $60 and $80 a ton. And lignite coal, which is the particular kind of coal we're talking about here, runs in the range of $15 to $25 a ton. So how they got to 250, I will never know. But we have appealed that decision, and I am now waiting for the judge to reverse it and remove that order as we speak. Of course, I can't tell the judge to move faster than I would like him to. He's been sitting on the decision now for 3 months. But we'll see where that goes. So in 2016, we have a CVD administrative review going on the old case for Ishtash. We have a 0 in that review. So I now have an appeal pending to get rid of the order against Ishtash, but we've also got a review result which says they're not receiving subsidies. Meanwhile, while this is going on, we have this review. A new case gets started because RTAC now wants to start over again because they think they've got a better shot doing this yet again after 2.5 years, having lost the last case. So they bring a new case. And the new case was filed, and we've just gotten the preliminary determination on March 1st. And here we are. In 2016, 2017, the preliminary rate as of March 1st for CVD was only for Habash. If you remember, Habash did not get caught in the last CVD case. They managed to get out. But they refiled that case just against Habash, and they got a rate, a subsidies rate. Again, they found a reason to bring them in. Similarly, on the dumping side, Ishtash also was found to have a rate and Habash a dumping rate, 7% and 5% respectively, with an all others rate in Turkey of 6.2%. That compares with the other producers who got named in that case, including Japan, which obviously got 209%. And you ask, why would the Japanese get 209%? Pretty much because the Japanese said, we don't care, right? We're not going to bother with it. The market isn't big enough for us. We don't want to get in the middle of this. We don't want to spend money on fancy, expensive lawyers. So they said, we're going to bag out. When the company does that, the U.S. picks whatever number the other side says they want them to pick. And if Nucor says the dumping rate's 209%, Bingo, that's what the dumping rate's going to be, 209%. So if you choose not to participate in a trade case, expect you to be frozen out of the market completely, because that's basically what's going to happen from now on. The dumping side is driven entirely by one factor, which the U.S. has chosen to change its methodology on. For the past 30-plus years, the U.S. has granted something called duty drawback adjustments to Turkish producers or any producer that applies. And under the duty drawback system, when you imported inputs and you make something and export it from those inputs, you don't pay duty on the imported inputs, right? You get a pass on that. Under U.S. law, you're supposed to increase your U.S. price by the amount of those forgiven duties. So it raises the U.S. price. And remember, when you're doing a dumping case, you're measuring the home market price against the U.S. price. So if the U.S. price goes up by the amount of a duty drawback, you're in pretty good territory, right? You're happy about that because you're most unlikely to be found to be dumping. The past 3 years, the U.S. government has found 5 different ways to deny drawback, almost always against Turkish producers, because they know that if they let that drawback in, there is zero dumping going on by Turkish producers. They are not dumping in the U.S. market. And so what do I have going on right now? I have 4 appeals going on one issue, duty drawback, all of which should be decided sometime in the next 2 years, because it takes that long to go through our court system. It's not ideal, but the U.S. has done some things methodologically which I call adventuresome in the world. After not complaining or saying a word about drawback claims from Turkish producers for 25-plus years, all of a sudden this is an issue. Why? I'm not going to say that there is an overt directive out there. There have been some scuttlebutt that the Commerce Department has been instructed to find margins at some level in order to catch as many foreign producers as possible in this net, because it allows them to monitor, to keep track, to force more discipline in the system and some degree of fear and uncertainty in the marketplace, which drives prices up. It's natural. What do we have? We've discussed this a little bit already. Recent issues, we have much more aggressive petitioners right now. Nucor and Bayer and CMC have gotten extremely aggressive in these cases. I have not seen the degree of antipathy exercised in cases in a good 20-plus years. And I'm saying objecting to everything. I might as well be in a trial atmosphere right now with these guys, because everything we do, they object to. I mean, it can be the most ridiculous small adjustment you can think of. You know, is your interest rate 2.2% or 2.3%? Well, we object, it can't be 2.2%. It must be 2.3%, right? Those kinds of issues. And it's all designed to put more and more pressure on the U.S. government and causing them to be more inflexible in the way they approach these things. Happenstance, I just got here from Belgrade, Serbia. Why was I in Belgrade? Because the U.S. government refused to conduct the audits on the verifications of the dumping responses of Turkish producers in Turkey. They said it was too dangerous to do it in Istanbul. Now, unless we're going to Gaziantep, I'm not particularly concerned about going to Istanbul for a verification, and there's no State Department advisory that says you can't go to Turkey to do a verification. But the verifiers said, no, we're not going to do it there. Why? Because it makes it much more difficult for the company to prepare, organize, move personnel, move documents, move files, and set up an SAP direct linking system to their home base in a foreign country, right? This is not designed to make it easier for you to pass the verification phase. Luckily, we did pass it. As far as I can tell, we did it in flying colors, but it wasn't easy. It was expensive, it was disruptive, and it was a much more difficult process because you're not at your home base conducting this type of an audit, which is always easier when you're at your plant. So we have these cases going on. There's been some changes in the dumping laws. They have gotten more strict about this. As I said, we've got this issue with drawback that is going on. There's been other changes in the law to make it easier for them to find adverse facts available, the 200% Japanese margins. They found ways to make it easier for those to occur. All this leads up to me being one very, very busy lawyer these days. We have more cases coming in now than we have ever had in our firm. And it's not just Turkey, it's all across the board. We've got Indian producers, we've got Mexican producers, we've got Turkish producers. I've got everybody calling me, asking me questions about what it is going to happen, when's the next case going to come. There's discussion lately of a new wire rod case that may be coming out pretty soon. We're not sure about that. I don't believe the numbers justify it. On the other hand, there's a lot of rumors on a new wire rod case, so we'll see what happens. The other thing we've noticed is a shortened timing for dumping investigations, which is also a harassment tactic. Normally, the government has about 8 months to bring and file one of these cases and finish it, but they always extend out to over a year, right? It takes about 13 months. In the last 2 cases, they have condensed it back to the shortest possible cycle you can imagine, while asking for more information than they normally do. So basically, they've cut 4 months off of the cycle, 5 months off of the cycle, and asked you to produce more information quicker and have it auditable. That is designed to make it more difficult to pass in a dumping verification. Again, I'm not saying that this is, malicious, but there is certainly a change in atmosphere. And by the way, the change is not a Trump administration change. This all started during the last 2 years of the Obama administration. Why? Because the Obama administration wanted authority to conclude the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And when they're trying to make a deal with the Congress to get trade authority to do something like that, they have to trade something for it. And what they traded for was a more aggressive stance on trade enforcement. That's where we've been seeing the start. And the Trump administration is continuing that trend. This came up on the U.S. Trade Representative's website within 3 days of the Trump inaugural. This is the new mantra for U.S. trade policy. We're now switching over to a more generalized view of what's going on in the United States. The Office of the United States Trade Representative is committed to ensuring that American workers are given a fair shot at competing across the globe. USTR is working to reshape the landscape of trade policy to work for all Americans. This is called the America First trade policy. This is the new environment in the United States. And if you go to the U.S. Trade Representative's website, that's the first thing you will see. All right? So, what does that mean? America first, everybody else is second. It's not about trading anymore. It's about what is going to benefit the United States economy, and maybe you'll get some offset benefit in the end of that, but that U.S. comes first, and they're going to project power in that fashion on a trade basis. The question is, and one of the speakers talked about it earlier today, is this all rhetoric, or is this going to be reality? Because we really don't know. Time is going to tell whether that's going to happen, and whether we're in a pause in free trade expansion, or whether we're into a reversal mode for some period of time in the current administration. And I am more concerned now about the latter, about a reversal, because of the way things have been coming out. So here are some of the snippets. This is our new Commerce Secretary, Mr. Wilbur Ross, Secretary Ross. These are statements right out of his congressional hearing for confirmation. Currency manipulation is another non-tariff barrier, obviously directed at China and Japan to some extent. I like the idea of using self-initiation by the Commerce Department to bring new cases. The United States Commerce Department has not self-initiated a dumping case in 20 years, as far as I can remember, because they never want to. They make the other side, the U.S. side, do the work. Now they're talking about bringing cases without anybody having to raise the issue, just sua sponte, filing on their own. And that happens so rarely, we're not sure how that's going to work. Commerce Department has said they're going to reallocate more resources to bring cases. The Commerce Department just found out they're getting a 15% cut in their budget under the new Trump administration plan. However, the Trump administration has also indicated they're going to move the balance of resources necessary to increase the size of the enforcement unit to compensate for it. I don't think we're going to have any new weather satellites going up for a while, because that's the only place where they can get the money in Commerce Department. But the point is, they're going to raise the amount of money they have to bring enforcement actions. And as you can see, they've already started doing this. We're going to be stricter about not granting extensions to the perpetrators. Again, this isn't the neutral proceeding, right? We've got the judge, jury, and the executioner all talking at the same time here. They must be dumping. They're the perpetrators of dumping, right? There hasn't even been a finding that somebody's guilty of anything yet, and yet they're always saying we have to tighten up on the plan. And that they're not going to look kindly on perpetrators delaying cases by not providing timely information. I can only laugh at that, because if the U.S. producers in the United States actually had to do one of these cases, they would almost undoubtedly fail, because of the amount of time and energy it takes to put in to get a positive result. We put a lot of energy into representing the Turkish producers properly to make sure they get the lowest possible rates, and that gets reflected in the margins you see. We get low single-digit margins, almost never above 10%, because we really work it to try to make sure that they're treated fairly, and that we exercise a lot of moral suasion on the authorities to try to do that. But it's getting harder, I got to tell you. It's very difficult to manage these cases now the way they're run. So, new developments. This came out while I was in verification last week. Why is this interesting? Mr. Navarro is the head of the National Trade Council at the White House now. He sent an email, which was placed on the record in a trade proceeding, telling the U.S. Commerce Department that the U.S. White House wanted them to take a more aggressive stance in a trade case by applying a new and untested methodology to cause a more likely dumping result. Okay? I have never seen the White House directly intervene on the record in a trade proceeding like this before. That is unusual, to say the least, and distressing, because it indicates a willingness to interfere in the administrative process that is going on at the Commerce Department, which is supposed to be completely politically neutral. I say supposed to be. It's not, but it's supposed to be. Here are some of the things of the new folks that you're going to be enjoying seeing more and more of. We've just talked about Mr. Navarro, the White House National Trade Council, and the author of Death by China. You think he has something to say about trade with China. Robert Lighthizer, U.S. Trade Representative, who's not been confirmed yet, but he was a part of the Reagan administration and the chief architect of the steel and auto voluntary restraint agreements that occurred, if you remember that far. We have Stephen Vaughn, the USTR General Counsel, colleague of Robert Lighthizer, and the former counselor to AK Steel, US Steel. And guess what? Trade cases. We have Wilbur Ross, Secretary of Commerce now, who's supposed to be pro-sensible trade, but it has to benefit the American worker. And then you have Gilbert Kaplan, Undersecretary for Trade at Commerce, who was also one of the administrators of the President's Steel Import Administration program. These guys are all U.S. Steel representatives, to a T. So if you think you're going to get a more sympathetic political audience in the United States for a while, the answer is no. These guys are all on the other side of every case that I've worked on in my career. I represent foreign respondents. These guys always represent U.S. steel companies. What are some of the things that are coming up for the future? I'm only prognosticating. I have no information to suggest any of this is actually going to happen. But we all remember the global safeguards cases from back in 2001, when the Bush administration was trying to get Trade Promotion Authority the last time and traded the global safeguards action for the ability to represent the U.S. in getting free trade agreements done. That global safeguards case lasted about a year and a half before President Bush eliminated it, but it started out with 35% plus tariffs, right? Everybody remembers that. That is possibly back on the table. Mr. Lighthizer, our U.S. Trade Representative designee, is no stranger to this. He was the one who put it in place the last time. Possible voluntary restraint agreements are highly WTO illegal, but no one's going to say anything if no one complains about it. A voluntary restraint agreement has been used in the past by the United States on various steel and automotive products at various times. We have something called the border adjusted cash flow tax, which, if put in place, would basically exempt exports from taxes and deny the deduction for imports as the cost. And the question is whether that's ever going to see the light of day, because it's created a huge political furor it has put U.S. importers like Walmart, Target, all the big U.S. import operations squarely against the U.S. producers, right? Because the importers are going to get hurt by this law, exporters are going to benefit from it. And everybody's running their numbers to see which side they're better off on. Boeing has already calculated that it's better off because it's a manufacturer of airplanes, and although it imports all the materials for those airplanes, it doesn't pay taxes if it exports them. And so it benefits on a net basis. So it's in favor of the cash flow border tax. We have renegotiation of the NAFTA. Doesn't affect places like Turkey right now, but it's the first stab in probably the renegotiation of other agreements like the Korean-US Free Trade Agreement. And certainly is something that we're all watching carefully because, in my view, Canada and Mexico are going to be separated and treated differently, very differently. We also have the new focus on bilateral trade agreements. The U.S. wants to go out and negotiate a bunch of bilaterals. I'm not sure how many countries are going to want to negotiate with the United States at this point on bilaterals because I don't see much appetite. The U.S. is going to try to impose its will on other countries doing it this way. Other countries are going to resist and probably not be interested in negotiating deals with the U.S. under those terms. And of course, we have other issues like the diminished importance of the World Trade Organization and world trade rules. And this raises another general issue, which we sort of touched a little bit upon today earlier. You know, what's going to happen with free trade generally? Are we into a protectionist mode or not? How is that going to work? And the answer is, I'm concerned because historically the U.S. has operated as sort of the chief champion of free trade, right? We say things, we do things that we shouldn't be doing. We don't always follow our own rules, but we generally try to act in a free trade environment in the United States and say we want to be pro-free trade. That rhetoric is now distinctly switched with the Trump administration saying, we're not going to do that anymore. We may not respect WTO decisions. We're going to go our own way. America first, other countries can follow. And what that does to the system is can be very corrosive over time, because what happens is other countries say, well, if the U.S. isn't going to follow the rules, why should I follow the rules, right? And you're finding already more and more of that starting to occur in little bits. And Director General Roberto Acevedo at the WTO has already shouted out several times, he's very concerned about what might happen with this, because if the U.S. isn't leading the way to maintain an open trading environment, no one has an interest in doing it in the end. And so then it becomes everybody on their own, and the beggar by neighbor policies that got us into trouble back in the 30s are back on the table again. And do we have to go through that pain to figure out that it wasn't a smart thing to do then, and it isn't a smart thing to do now? That is going to be an open question for the future. So, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. All I know is we've got some warning signs ahead, and we better be prepared for it. And that's all I got to say. So any questions, please feel free. Historically, in the United States, 50% of all trade actions are related to steel. It's the most popular sport in town. Any trade lawyer worth his or her salt is going to have at least half of their caseload is steel. And I will say probably 70% of my caseload now is steel. We have some chemical products. We have some rayon products. We have, like I represent Mexican tomato producers. So I get all sorts of weird things. But the bread and butter of our practice is steel, and it's going to be that way for a while.
I really feel like some big guy has intervened our football game and trying to take away the ball. Any other questions for Mr. Nolan?
All right. It's lunchtime.
There's one question in the back there.
Hello, Link Inspection, Turkey, Istanbul. Is liberation finished?
Is the what?
Liberation.
No, we're not finished.
Not yet.
No. What we have, are you talking about the current cases going on? Verification is done in Turkey, or regarding Turkey right now. Liberation. No, they're not going to have any liberation. Unless you want to consider the U.S. Closing the doors and telling everybody to wait outside is liberation. So.
Any other questions? That's it, I
All right,
guess.
it's lunchtime.
Thanks very much.
All right.
I appreciate it.